Loneliness often arrives like an uninvited guest at the end of a long day, sitting quietly in the corner of the room while the world outside continues its frantic pace. You might feel its weight when the house grows still or when you are standing in the middle of a crowded street where everyone seems to have a destination except for you. It is a common human experience, yet we often treat it as a shadow to be feared or a void to be filled with noise, screens, and constant distractions. People frequently run away from this feeling because it mirrors a deep sense of separation, making them feel as if they are drifting alone on a vast ocean without a compass. However, if you look at it through a different lens, this very stillness can become a sacred space, a laboratory of the soul where you finally have the chance to meet the person you have been ignoring for years, which is yourself. Understanding loneliness is not about finding a way to eliminate it but about changing your relationship with it so that it no longer feels like a burden. In the ancient records of those who walked the path of inner peace, there are stories of individuals who found their greatest clarity not in the warmth of a community but in the embrace of solitude. Think of the young prince who left everything behind, not because he hated the world, but because he realized that the noise of the palace was drowning out the truth of existence. When he sat under the tree, he was physically alone, but he was not lonely in the way we typically define the term. He was engaging in a profound dialogue with the nature of reality. For him, the absence of others was the presence of clarity. You can find this same potential within your own quiet moments if you stop viewing them as a lack of company and start seeing them as an abundance of self. There is a beautiful story from the time of the Buddha about a woman named Patakara who suffered unimaginable losses, losing her entire family in a series of tragic events. Her mind was fractured by grief and she wandered in a state of deep isolation, disconnected from herself and the world. When she finally encountered the teacher, he did not offer her a quick fix or a crowd to hide in. Instead, he spoke to her with such profound empathy that she felt seen for the first time in her despair. He helped her realize that the pain she felt was a part of the human condition and that by facing her inner emptiness, she could find a strength that was unshakable. She eventually moved from a place of devastating loneliness to a state of liberated solitude. Her journey teaches us that even when we feel completely broken and alone, there is a path through that darkness that leads to a clear and peaceful mind. We often confuse being alone with being lonely. Being alone is a physical state where no other people are present, while loneliness is an emotional ache, a feeling that something is missing. You can be in a room full of friends and still feel a stinging sense of isolation if you do not feel understood or connected. Conversely, you can be by yourself in a quiet garden and feel a deep sense of belonging to the trees, the wind, and the universe. The difference lies in how you perceive your own presence. If you are your own best friend, then being alone is an opportunity for joy and reflection. If you are a stranger to yourself, then being alone feels like being trapped with someone you do not know or like. To transform this experience, you might start by observing the urge to escape when the silence becomes too loud. Perhaps you reach for your phone to scroll through social media or turn on the music just to have some background noise. In those moments, try to pause and ask yourself what you are truly running from. Usually, it is not the silence itself but the thoughts and feelings that emerge when the distractions fade away. By staying with that discomfort for just a few minutes longer, you begin to build a bridge to your inner world. You realize that the silence is not an enemy but a mirror. There was a monk in the early days of the community who struggled greatly with his practice because he felt constantly lonely and missed his former life of luxury and social standing. He felt that the walls of his meditation cell were closing in on him. He went to the Buddha and expressed his desire to leave, feeling that he was not suited for such a solitary life. The Buddha asked him to look at a jar of water that had been stirred up with mud. He told the monk that as long as the water was being stirred, no one could see the bottom. But when the jar was left alone and the water became still, the mud settled and the water became clear. Our minds are exactly like that jar. When we are constantly moving and interacting, our inner vision is clouded. Solitude is the act of letting the jar sit still so that the mud of our confusion and anxiety can settle, allowing us to see the gold that lies at the bottom of our own hearts. This process of settling requires a great deal of patience and gentleness. You cannot force the mud to settle faster by poking at it. In the same way, you cannot force yourself to feel peaceful when you are feeling lonely. You simply acknowledge the feeling, give it space, and wait. You say to yourself that it is okay to feel this way and that you are going to stay here and be a kind witness to your own experience. This shift from being a victim of loneliness to being an observer of it is the first step toward freedom. Imagine a bird that has been kept in a cage for a long time. Even when the door is opened, the bird might stay inside because it is afraid of the vast sky. Many of us are like that bird. We are so used to the cage of our habits and social expectations that the vastness of our own inner space feels terrifying. But once the bird takes that first flight, it realizes that the sky is not a void but a place of absolute liberty. Your solitude is that sky. It is where you can stretch your wings without hitting the bars of someone else's opinions or demands. In our modern lives, we are taught to value productivity and social connection above all else. We are told that being busy is a sign of success and that having a large social circle is a sign of happiness. This cultural pressure makes us feel ashamed when we find ourselves alone on a Friday night or when we realize we have no one to call in a moment of vulnerability. We feel as though we have failed at being human. But what if the opposite is true? What if the ability to be happy in one's own company is the highest form of success? There is a profound sense of dignity in the person who can sit quietly in a room and not feel the need to be anywhere else or be anyone else. This is the quality of a heart that has come home. When you are at home within yourself, the external world becomes a place you visit rather than a place you rely on for your identity. You no longer look at other people as sources of validation or as distractions from your own emptiness. Instead, you look at them with a sense of wholeness, which allows for much deeper and more authentic connections. Consider the story of a young man who was an expert at playing the lute. He was famous throughout the land and was always surrounded by admirers. Yet, he felt a nagging sense of hollowness. He felt that people loved the music but did not know the musician. One day, he decided to travel to a remote mountain to play only for the wind and the stars. For the first few days, he felt miserable and desperately missed the applause. But as weeks went by, his music began to change. It became slower, deeper, and more resonant. He realized that when he played for others, he was performing, but when he played for himself in the silence, he was praying. He discovered that the most beautiful melodies come from the silence that precedes them. When he finally returned to the city, his music had the power to heal people's souls because it carried the weight and the peace of the mountain. Your life is your own instrument. When you spend time in solitude, you are tuning that instrument. You are learning the unique resonance of your own soul. You are discovering the themes and rhythms that define who you are when no one is watching. This is not a selfish act. In fact, it is the most generous thing you can do for the world. A person who is at peace with themselves brings peace into every room they enter. A person who is comfortable with their own loneliness becomes a refuge for others who are struggling with theirs. We often think that to be compassionate, we must always be doing something for others. But sometimes, the greatest act of compassion is to be a person who is not afraid of the dark or the quiet. When you are not afraid of your own loneliness, you stop using people to fill your gaps. You stop being needy in your relationships and start being present. You can listen to a friend's problems without trying to fix them or making it about yourself, because you are not looking for anything from them. You are already full. Think of the forest at night. To someone who is afraid, the forest is a place of hidden dangers and eerie silence. But to the one who knows the forest, it is a place of deep rest and hidden life. The trees are breathing, the small creatures are moving through the undergrowth, and the entire ecosystem is replenishing itself. Your inner world is that forest. When you first enter it, you might only see the shadows. But if you stay long enough, your eyes adjust. You begin to see the beauty in the shadows and the life that thrives in the quiet. You realize that what you thought was a wasteland is actually a garden that has been waiting for you to tend to it. The Buddha often spoke about the importance of finding a quiet place, whether it was at the foot of a tree or in an empty building. He was not suggesting that everyone should become a hermit and never speak to anyone again. Rather, he was pointing to the necessity of balance. We need the community to learn and grow, but we need the solitude to integrate and understand. Without the quiet, the lessons we learn from others remain superficial. They are like seeds scattered on a paved road, they cannot take root. Solitude is the tilling of the soil so that those seeds can grow into sturdy trees. There was a disciple who was very frustrated because he felt he wasn't making any progress. He was always asking questions and seeking advice from every senior monk he could find. One day, a wise elder took him to the edge of a lake and asked him what he saw. The disciple said he saw the mountains reflected in the water. The elder then threw a large stone into the lake, creating ripples that broke the reflection. The elder asked him what he saw now. The disciple said he saw only broken shapes and moving water. The elder told him that his constant seeking and his fear of being alone with his thoughts were like that stone. He was so busy asking others for the truth that he was breaking the reflection of the truth within himself. He needed to stop throwing stones and let the water of his mind become still. This stillness is not a state of nothingness. It is a state of heightened awareness. When you are alone and quiet, you begin to notice things you never noticed before. You notice the way your breath moves in your body, the subtle sensations in your hands, the way a thought arises and then dissolves like a cloud. You begin to see the patterns of your own mind, the way you cling to certain memories or worry about certain futures. This is the beginning of wisdom. You are no longer just living your life, you are understanding it. Often, our fear of loneliness is tied to our fear of being forgotten or being insignificant. We feel that if we are not interacting with others, we might cease to exist in some way. But the stars do not need an audience to shine, and the flowers do not need someone to praise them to bloom. They simply are. When you embrace your solitude, you touch this same quality of being. You realize that your value does not depend on your social status, your achievements, or how many people like you. Your value is inherent. You are a part of this incredible tapestry of life, and that is enough. There is a story of a monk who lived alone in a cave for many years. A traveler once stumbled upon him and asked if he wasn't terribly lonely living so far from everyone. The monk smiled and said that he was actually much less lonely now than when he lived in the city. In the city, he said, he was always trying to be someone else to please others, and he felt a great distance between his true self and his public self. In the cave, that distance had vanished. He was finally with himself, and in being with himself, he felt connected to everything. He could hear the mountain speaking, he could feel the pulse of the earth, and he felt the presence of the Buddha in every breath. This kind of connection is what we are truly looking for when we seek out others. We are looking for a sense of belonging. But the deepest belonging is not to a group or a person, it is a belonging to the present moment and to the truth of our own nature. When you find this, you can be in a crowd or in a cave, and your peace will remain the same. You are no longer at the mercy of external circumstances to feel okay. The realization that your peace is not dependent on the outside world is a profound turning point in any journey towards self-discovery. When you stop fearing the quiet, you begin to notice that the silence itself has a voice, one that speaks in a language of subtle feelings and intuitive whispers rather than loud demands. It is much like learning to listen to the growth of a tree. You cannot hear it if you are shouting or if you are focused on the noise of the traffic nearby. You have to be still, patient, and deeply attentive. In that attentiveness, you discover that you are never truly alone because you are a part of a vast, interconnected web of life that is constantly breathing and moving all around you. There is an old story about a young monk who was sent by his master to live in a small hut on the outskirts of a village. His task was simply to sit and watch the seasons change. At first, the young man was filled with anxiety and a sense of isolation. He missed the chants of the monastery and the shared meals with his brothers. He felt that his life was being wasted in the middle of nowhere. One evening, as he sat by the door, he watched a spider weaving its web across the corner of the porch. He watched the precision of its movements and the way it waited with absolute patience for its needs to be met. He realized that the spider was not lonely, it was simply being a spider, fully engaged with its own existence. This small observation cracked open his heart. He began to see the same dignity in the grass, the stones, and the rain. He understood that the feeling of loneliness was just a wall he had built between himself and the rest of creation. When you begin to dissolve this wall, you find that your interactions with others take on a new quality of light. You no longer approach people with a hidden agenda of needing them to take away your sadness or fill your empty spaces. Instead, you come to them as an overflowing cup, ready to share the abundance of your own inner peace. This is the true meaning of spiritual friendship. It is not two hungry people trying to feed each other from empty bowls, but two whole individuals celebrating the richness of life together. Think of the way a great mountain stands. It does not ask for permission to be tall, nor does it feel lonely because it is higher than the surrounding hills. It simply occupies its space with a quiet majesty. It endures the storms, the snow, and the heat of the sun without losing its core stability. You have that same mountain-like quality within you. Your loneliness is often just the clouds passing by the peak. The clouds might obscure the view for a while, and they might even bring heavy rain, but they do not change the essence of the mountain. By staying grounded in your own presence, you learn to let the clouds of emotion come and go without being swept away by them. In the early records, there is a mention of a group of forest dwellers who practiced the art of mountain-like meditation. They did not speak much, but their presence was so powerful that even the wild animals felt safe around them. They had cultivated a level of inner stillness that radiated outward as a field of protection and kindness. They found that by being comfortable with their own silence, they could understand the suffering of others without even hearing a word. This is the power of a quiet heart. It becomes a mirror that reflects the truth back to the world, offering a sense of calm to everyone who passes by. You might find that as you spend more time in your own company, your taste for entertainment and social engagement begins to shift. You might find that you no longer enjoy gossip or superficial conversations that leave you feeling drained. You start to crave substance and sincerity. You find more joy in a simple walk through the park or a quiet evening with a good book than you ever did in the frantic pursuit of social status. This is not because you are becoming antisocial, but because you are becoming more selective about what you allow into your sacred inner space. You are learning to protect your peace as if it were a rare and beautiful flame. There was a lay follower during the Buddha's time who was a very busy merchant. He was constantly surrounded by people, dealing with contracts, and managing his wealth. Despite his success, he felt a deep sense of inner poverty. He approached a wise teacher and asked how he could find peace in the middle of such a chaotic life. The teacher told him to find 10 minutes every day to sit in his garden and do absolutely nothing. The merchant thought this was too simple and perhaps a bit silly, but he tried it anyway. For the first few days, his mind raced with 1,000 chores and worries. He felt the itch to get up and be productive. But by the 10th day, he noticed a bird bathing in a small fountain. He watched the water droplets sparkling in the sun and felt a sudden, sharp burst of gratitude for just being alive. That 10-minute window of solitude became the anchor for his entire day. It didn't change his work, but it changed the person who was doing the work. We often think that we need to go on long retreats or travel to distant temples to find ourselves. While those things can be helpful, the real work happens in the small gaps of our daily lives. It happens in the moment you choose to sit quietly with your coffee instead of reaching for your phone. It happens when you drive home in silence instead of listening to the radio. These are the moments where you are inviting your soul to catch up with your body. You are giving yourself the gift of your own undivided attention. In this state of attention, you might discover that much of your suffering comes from the stories you tell yourself about your loneliness. You might tell yourself that you are alone because you are not good enough, or because you have made too many mistakes, or because the world is a cold and uncaring place. These stories are like heavy chains that keep you tethered to your pain. When you look at your loneliness without the stories, you see that it is just a sensation in the body, a certain tightness in the chest or a hollow feeling in the stomach. When you stop fighting the sensation and just breathe into it, the chains begin to rust and fall away. You realize that you are not your stories. You are the awareness that is aware of the stories. There is a profound freedom in this realization. If you are not your thoughts and you are not your feelings, then you are not bound by them. You can observe your loneliness as if it were a weather pattern passing through a vast sky. You don't have to do anything about the weather, you just have to wait for it to change, which it always does. This understanding brings a sense of humor to your life. You can look at your own dramatic mind and smile, knowing that it is just doing what minds do, which is creating drama. Consider the life of a master artist who spends years alone in a studio. To an outsider, it might look like a life of deprivation and isolation. But to the artist, it is a life of intense engagement and discovery. Every stroke of the brush is a conversation with the canvas. Every moment of frustration is a doorway to a new technique. The artist is not lonely because they are in a relationship with the creative process. Your life is your greatest work of art. Every moment of solitude is a chance to add a new color or a deeper shadow to the masterpiece of your character. You are learning to paint with the colors of patience, resilience, and compassion. I remember a story about a woman who lived in a very noisy city apartment. She was constantly bothered by the sound of sirens, shouting, and construction. She felt that her environment was making it impossible for her to find peace. She went to see a meditation teacher who lived in a quiet village. The teacher listened to her complaints and then handed her a small bell. He told her to go back to her apartment, and every time she heard a loud noise, she should ring the bell and say to herself that the noise was just the sound of the universe breathing. He told her that if she could learn to be okay with the noise, she would find a silence that was deeper than any physical quiet. She went back and practiced this faithfully. Eventually, the external noise no longer felt like an intrusion. It became the background music to her own inner stillness. She found that the more she embraced the chaos, the more her inner world became a sanctuary. This is the secret to making friends with your loneliness. You don't wait for the world to get quiet so that you can be at peace. You find the peace within yourself so that the world can be as loud as it wants to be. You become like a deep lake. On the surface, there might be waves and wind, but at the bottom, there is a constant, cool stillness. This stillness is your true home. It is where you go to recharge, to reflect, and to remember who you really are. When you are no longer running from yourself, you find that you have a much greater capacity for empathy toward others. You recognize that everyone you meet is also carrying their own secret burden of loneliness. You see the hidden pain behind the smiles and the frantic activity. This recognition softens your heart. You stop judging people for their flaws and start seeing them as fellow travelers who are also trying to find their way home. Your presence becomes a quiet comfort to them, even if you never say a word about it. There was a group of monks who were known for their practice of radical inclusion. They didn't just include other people, they included every thought and feeling they had. If they felt angry, they would say that anger has arrived. Nu ho kam thay ko don, ho senoi rang su ko don dang o day. They treated every emotion like a guest who had come to visit for a few days. They would offer the guest a seat, a cup of tea, and their full attention. They didn't try to push the guest out the door, nor did they ask the guest to stay forever. They simply let the guest be there until it was time for them to leave. By treating their own inner world with this much respect, they became masters of their own lives. They were never overwhelmed because they were always the host, never the hostage of their emotions. You can practice this same radical inclusion in your own life. When the feeling of being alone starts to ache, don't reach for a distraction. Instead, turn toward the feeling. Imagine you are sitting down with a small, frightened child. You wouldn't yell at the child or tell them to go away. You would sit with them, hold their hand, and let them know that they are safe. That is how you should treat your own lonely heart. Give it the warmth and the attention it is asking for. In doing so, you will find that the fear begins to melt away, replaced by a sense of profound intimacy with yourself. This intimacy is the foundation of all true happiness. It is the steady flame that keeps you warm when the world feels cold. It is the compass that points the way when you feel lost. When you have this, you have everything. You are no longer searching for happiness in the hands of others, because you have found the source of it within your own quiet breath. You are free. The path to this freedom is not a straight line. There will be days when you feel like you have mastered your solitude, and there will be days when the loneliness feels as sharp as a knife. This is normal. The goal is not to be perfect, but to be persistent. Each time you choose to stay with yourself instead of running away, you are strengthening your inner muscles. You are becoming a person of substance and depth. You are becoming a person who can walk through the fire of life without being burned. Think of the lotus flower that grows in the mud. It does not hate the mud, nor does it try to escape it. It uses the nutrients from the mud to grow a beautiful blossom that sits high above the water. Your loneliness is your mud. It is the dark, heavy place where your growth begins. Without it, you would not have the strength or the depth to reach for the light. Embrace the mud of your life, for it is the very thing that will allow you to bloom in ways you never thought possible. As you continue on this journey, you will find that the boundary between you and the rest of the world begins to blur in the most beautiful way. You realize that the same life force that moves through you is moving through the trees, the animals, and every other person on this planet. When you sit in silence, you are not just sitting by yourself, you are sitting with the entire universe. You are a part of the great song of existence, and your silence is a vital part of the harmony. There is nothing to fear in the quiet, for the quiet is where the truth lives. Let your loneliness be the teacher that leads you back to your own heart. Let it be the fire that burns away everything that is not real. And let it be the space where you finally learn to love yourself without conditions or exceptions. When you can do that, you will never be lonely again, for you will always be in the company of the most important person in your life. You will be home. The feeling of being home is not a location on a map but a state of absolute alignment where your external actions and your internal truth meet in a quiet embrace. When you reach this stage of the journey, you begin to understand that the loneliness you once feared was actually a misinterpreted call for deeper intimacy with the essence of life itself. It is like an old radio that was once stuck on a frequency of static and noise, suddenly finding a clear signal that plays a melody you have known since before you were born. This melody is the pulse of the present moment, a rhythm that does not require words or explanations to be felt. You find that you no longer need to explain yourself to the world or justify your presence because your existence is its own justification. In the chronicles of ancient wisdom, there is a story of a merchant who spent his entire life building a massive empire of trade and influence. He was never alone, always surrounded by bodyguards, servants, and business partners who hung on his every word. Yet, in the middle of his grandest banquet, he would often feel a sudden, sharp pang of isolation that made him feel as though he were a ghost wandering through his own halls. One day, he decided to leave his wealth behind for a week and walked into the mountains with nothing but a simple robe and a wooden bowl. He spent the first 3 days in a state of sheer panic, convinced that he was losing his mind because there was no one to tell him who he was. But on the 4th day, he sat by a stream and watched a leaf floating on the water. He saw how the leaf did not struggle against the current or try to be anything other than a leaf. He realized that for his entire life, he had been trying to be a merchant, a leader, and a success, but he had forgotten how to just be a human being. In that moment of profound solitude, the heavy armor of his identity fell away, and he felt a lightness he had never known. When he returned to his life, he was still a merchant, but the ghost was gone. He had found a companion in his own silence that no amount of gold could ever buy. This lightness is available to everyone who is willing to stop running. We often think that we are lonely because we lack the love of others, but more often than not, we are lonely because we lack a connection to the source of love within ourselves. We are like people standing in a torrential rainstorm, crying out that we are thirsty. The nourishment we seek is already falling all around us and through us, but we have closed our umbrellas and built roofs of anxiety that keep the water away. To embrace your loneliness is to step out from under those roofs and let the rain soak you to the bone. It is to realize that the universe is not a cold, empty void, but a living, breathing presence that is constantly reaching out to you. There was a young woman during the time of the early Sangha who struggled with a deep sense of being an outsider. Even when she was among the followers, she felt as though she didn't quite belong, as if everyone else knew a secret that she was not invited to share. She took her frustration to a wise elder who was known for her deep compassion. The elder took the woman to a nearby field where many different types of flowers were blooming. She pointed out that the jasmine did not try to be a rose, and the lotus did not compete with the sunflower. Each flower bloomed in its own time and in its own way, and yet they all shared the same earth, the same sun, and the same air. The elder told her that her feeling of not belonging was based on the false idea that she had to be like everyone else to be part of the whole. She explained that the woman's unique perspective and even her unique struggles were her specific way of blooming. The woman realized that her loneliness was actually her individuality trying to find its voice. She stopped trying to fit into a mold and started to appreciate the unique shape of her own soul. When you stop trying to fit in, you paradoxically find that you belong everywhere. You realize that your breath is the same breath that moves through the lungs of every creature on this earth. You realize that your blood contains the same elements as the stars in the sky. This is the ultimate cure for loneliness. It is the transition from a narrow, ego-centered view of the world to a vast, universal perspective. You see that you are not a drop of water lost in the ocean, but you are the entire ocean in a single drop. This shift in perception changes everything. The four walls of your room no longer feel like a prison, they feel like a temple where the mystery of existence is unfolding in every moment. There is a certain humor that comes with this realization. You look back at all the times you felt desperate for attention or validation and you realize how much energy you spent chasing shadows. It is like a person who spends hours looking for their glasses, only to realize they were on their face the entire time. You can laugh at yourself with a sense of warmth and kindness, knowing that your struggles were just part of the process of waking up. This laughter is a healing balm. It lightens the heart and reminds you that life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived. In our daily lives, we can cultivate this sense of connection through the practice of mindful presence. When you are eating a meal alone, try to really taste the food. Think of the sun, the rain, and the earth that went into growing each vegetable. Think of the hands that harvested it and the journey it took to reach your plate. When you do this, you realize that you are never truly eating alone. You are in communion with the entire planet. When you are walking down the street, feel the ground beneath your feet and acknowledge the trees and the birds as your companions. This practice turns every mundane activity into a sacred ritual of connection. There was an old gardener who worked in a royal park. He was a man of very few words, and many people thought he was a lonely, bitter soul because he never joined in the village festivals. One day, a curious young prince asked him if he ever felt sad being alone with the plants all day. The gardener looked up and smiled, his eyes twinkling with a depth of peace that the prince had never seen. He said that he was never alone because the roses told him about the beauty of the morning, the ancient oaks told him about the strength of the ages, and the soil told him about the cycle of life and death. He told the prince that people often talk too much and listen too little, and that in the silence, he could hear the heartbeat of the world. He wasn't avoiding people because he disliked them, he was simply so full of the music of the garden that he didn't need the noise of the crowd. We often use words to hide from each other and from ourselves. We fill the air with chatter because we are afraid of what we might discover in the quiet. But the most important truths cannot be spoken, they can only be felt. When you sit in silence with your loneliness, you are making space for those truths to emerge. You are allowing the deeper layers of your being to rise to the surface. It is like a lake that has been whipped up by a storm. As long as the wind is blowing and the waves are crashing, you cannot see what lies beneath. But when the wind dies down and the water becomes still, you can see the colorful stones, the graceful fish, and the hidden plants at the bottom. Your inner world is full of such treasures, but you will never see them if you are always making noise. There is a story about a seeker who traveled to a remote cave to meet a famous hermit. When he arrived, he found the hermit sitting in total darkness. The seeker asked why he didn't light a lamp. The hermit replied that when he first came to the cave, he used many lamps because he was afraid of the dark. But as he sat in the silence year after year, his eyes adjusted, and he realized that the darkness was actually a soft, velvety light that didn't hurt his eyes. He said that the lamps only showed him the walls of the cave, but the darkness allowed him to see the infinite space within himself. This is what happens when we stop trying to light up our lives with constant external stimulation. We discover that we have an inner light that is far more powerful and enduring. This inner light is what the ancients called the Buddha nature or the original mind. It is the part of you that is never lonely, never afraid, and never lacking. It is like the sun that is always shining, even when it is hidden behind thick clouds of thought and emotion. When you practice making friends with your loneliness, you are essentially learning how to look past the clouds. You are training yourself to remember the sun, even in the middle of a long, dark night. This remembrance is the source of true resilience. It allows you to face the challenges of life with a calm and steady heart. You might notice that as you become more comfortable with yourself, people are naturally drawn to you. They can sense your inner stability and your lack of neediness. You become a person who radiates a sense of safety and peace. People feel they can be themselves around you because you are so clearly yourself. This is the irony of the spiritual path. The more you embrace your solitude, the more meaningful your relationships become. You stop being a parasite looking for a host and start being a light looking for a place to shine. I recall a story of a great teacher who was once asked what the most important quality for a student was. Many people expected him to say intelligence, discipline, or devotion. Instead, he said the most important quality was the ability to be alone without being lonely. He explained that a student who cannot be alone will always be looking to the teacher or the community for answers that can only be found within. But a student who is comfortable in their own company has already mastered the most difficult lesson. They have learned that the ultimate teacher is their own awareness. Your loneliness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are human, and that you have a deep, innate longing for connection. The mistake we make is looking for that connection in all the wrong places. We look for it in the approval of strangers, in the acquisition of things, and in the temporary highs of excitement. But these are all like drinking salt water to quench a thirst. They only make us more thirsty. The only thing that can truly satisfy that longing is the recognition of your own wholeness. When you sit quietly today, don't look for a way out of your feelings. Look for a way in. Dive into the center of your loneliness and see what is there. You might find a lingering sadness, a hidden fear, or a forgotten dream. Don't judge whatever you find. Just hold it with the same kindness you would show to a dear friend. In that act of holding, the loneliness transforms. It ceases to be a gap and becomes a bridge. It becomes the very thing that connects you to the heart of every other being who has ever felt alone. There is a beautiful ancient poem that speaks of a person sitting alone in a mountain hut while the snow falls outside. The poem says that although there are no footprints leading to the door, the room is full of light. This is the state we are aiming for. To be physically alone, to be surrounded by the cold and the quiet, and yet to be so full of inner light that the entire world feels warm. This is the true meaning of making friends with your loneliness. It is the discovery that the friend you have been searching for all your life has been walking beside you in every step you took. As you move through the rest of your day, try to carry a little piece of that quiet light with you. Whether you are talking to someone, working on a task, or just walking through a room, remember that there is a place within you that is always still and always at peace. You can return to that place at any time, just by taking a single conscious breath. You don't need to go anywhere or do anything special. You just need to remember. The act of remembering is like a gentle hand clearing the dust from a mirror, revealing a reflection that has always been there, steady and clear. When you realize that the stillness within you is not something you need to create but something you simply need to inhabit, the frantic search for external company begins to lose its grip on your heart. You start to see that the world is not a series of empty spaces waiting to be filled, but a vibrant tapestry of moments waiting to be felt. This inner shift allows you to move through life with a sense of grace, as if you are dancing to a music that only you can hear, yet its rhythm supports every step you take in the physical world. There is an old story from the days when practitioners lived in the deep bamboo forests of the East. A young seeker once approached a master who lived in a tiny hut that seemed to be held together by nothing but mountain mist and silence. The seeker asked, "How do you manage to live here all alone without a single soul to talk to for months on end? Does the silence not drive you to despair?" The master looked at the young man, gestured to the surrounding forest, and said that he was never alone because the bamboo was always whispering its secrets of flexibility, and the wind was always teaching him how to let go. He said that people are often so busy talking that they never hear what the universe is trying to tell them. He explained that in the city, he felt lonely because he was surrounded by people who were pretending to be something they were not, but in the forest, he was among beings that were perfectly themselves. He found that true companionship is not about having someone to talk to, but about being in the presence of something that is authentic. This authenticity is what we often lack in our social interactions. We wear masks to hide our vulnerabilities, we use words to build walls, and we perform roles to gain approval. This performance is exhausting, and it is the primary reason why we feel lonely even when we are with others. We are not actually being seen, only our masks are being seen. When you spend time in solitude and learn to be comfortable with your own raw, unfiltered self, you stop needing to perform. You become authentic. And when you are authentic, the loneliness that comes from being a stranger to yourself simply evaporates. You find that you can be alone and feel completely connected, or you can be with others and feel completely at ease because you are no longer trying to protect a false image. Think of a potter working with clay. If the potter is in a hurry or distracted, the clay becomes lumpy and the vessel is easily broken. But if the potter sits in silence, fully present with the texture and the weight of the earth, the vessel becomes strong and beautiful. Your time alone is the time you spend on the potter's wheel of life. You are smoothing out the lumps of your fears and shaping your character into something that can hold the water of wisdom without leaking. If you never take the time to sit in that silence, your inner life will remain fragile and unfinished. You will always be looking for someone else to fix your cracks, not realizing that you are the only one who can truly heal yourself. In the early teachings, there is a concept of the great emptiness, which is often misunderstood as a bleak or lonely state. In reality, this emptiness is like a womb, a space of infinite potential where everything is born and everything returns. When you sit with your loneliness and stop trying to fill it with junk, you are actually entering this great emptiness. You are clearing out the clutter of your mind to make room for something much larger than your small ego. It is like clearing a path through a thick jungle. It takes effort and it can be scary to step into the unknown, but eventually, you reach a clearing where the sun shines brightly and you can see for miles in every direction. I remember a story of a traveler who found himself lost in a vast desert. For days, he saw nothing but sand and sky. He began to talk to himself, then to the stars, and eventually, he fell into a deep silence. He expected to feel a crushing sense of isolation, but instead, he felt a strange sense of expansion. He felt as though the desert was not outside of him, but inside of him. He realized that the boundary between his skin and the air was just an illusion. When he was finally rescued, people were surprised by how calm and radiant he appeared. He told them that he had gone into the desert looking for a way out, but he found a way in. He had discovered that when there is nothing left to hold on to, you find that you are being held by everything. This sense of being held is the ultimate antidote to the fear of being alone. It is the realization that you are supported by the earth, nourished by the air, and illuminated by the sun. You are not an accidental visitor on this planet, you are a vital expression of life itself. When you truly feel this, the word loneliness loses its meaning. It is replaced by a sense of profound belonging that does not depend on anyone else's presence or approval. You become like a tree with deep roots. The wind may blow and the leaves may fall, but the core of the tree remains unmoved, drawing its strength from the dark, quiet earth. There was once a famous musician who was known for his ability to bring people to tears with his melodies. Someone asked him how he managed to put so much emotion into his art. He replied that before every performance, he would spend an hour sitting in a dark, empty room. He said that he needed to touch the bottom of his own silence before he could find the notes that would touch others. He understood that all great art and all great wisdom come from that quiet place where we are stripped of our pretenses. If you are always running from your loneliness, you are running from the source of your own creativity and depth. You are choosing to live on the surface of your life, where the water is shallow and easily disturbed. We often think of solitude as a lack of noise, but it is actually a different kind of sound. It is the sound of your own heart beating, the sound of your thoughts rising and falling like waves, and the sound of the world just being as it is. When you stop fighting the silence, you begin to hear its music. It is a subtle, beautiful harmony that has been playing since the beginning of time. By being alone, you are simply giving yourself the chance to tune into that frequency. You are learning to listen with your whole being, not just your ears. In our modern world, we are constantly bombarded with messages telling us that we need more to be happy. More friends, more followers, more experiences, more things. This constant craving is the root of our modern loneliness. We are like people trying to fill a bucket that has a hole in the bottom. No matter how much we pour in, we never feel full. The practice of making friends with your loneliness is the practice of plugging that hole. It is the realization that you are already enough, exactly as you are, in this very moment. You don't need to add anything to yourself to be complete. You just need to subtract the things that are preventing you from seeing your own wholeness. There is a story of a man who was obsessed with finding the perfect companion. He traveled to every corner of the world, meeting thousands of people, but no one seemed to be the right fit. He grew older and more bitter, feeling that life had cheated him. One day, he sat down by a clear mountain lake and saw his own reflection. He noticed the lines of worry on his face and the sadness in his eyes. For the first time, he felt a surge of compassion for himself. He realized that he had been so busy looking for someone else to love him that he had completely neglected to love the person staring back at him in the water. He stopped traveling and spent the rest of his days by that lake, not as a lonely old man, but as a person who had finally found the companion he had been looking for all along. When you begin to treat yourself with that same level of compassion and curiosity, your life begins to change in subtle but powerful ways. You find that you have more energy because you are no longer wasting it on anxiety and self-criticism. You find that your relationships improve because you are no longer looking to others to save you. You become a more stable and reliable friend because you are not constantly shifting with the winds of external validation. You are like a lighthouse. A lighthouse doesn't run around the ocean looking for ships to save, it just stands there and shines its light. The ships find their way because the light is steady and true. Your solitude is your time to tend to your own light. It is your time to make sure that your lamp is full of oil and your glass is clean. This is not a selfish act. If your light goes out, you cannot help anyone else find their way in the dark. By embracing your loneliness and transforming it into a peaceful solitude, you are becoming a beacon of hope for a world that is often lost in the shadows of disconnection. You are showing others that it is possible to be alone without being lonely, and to be quiet without being empty. Think of the night sky. If the stars were all clustered together in one spot, the rest of the sky would be a terrifying void. But because they are spaced out, each one having its own vast area of darkness around it, the night becomes a thing of incredible beauty. Your life is like one of those stars. You need that space of silence and solitude around you to truly shine. Without it, your light would be swallowed up by the glare of the world. Embrace your space. Value your darkness as much as your light, for it is the darkness that allows the light to be seen. There was a disciple who asked his teacher why the path to enlightenment was often described as a solitary one. The teacher replied that it is not because we are meant to be alone, but because the door to the truth is only wide enough for one person at a time. You cannot bring your friends, your family, or your reputation through that door. You have to go through it as you are, without any baggage. But once you step through to the other side, you realize that everyone else is already there. You discover that the solitude was just the hallway that led to the ultimate party. So, when you find yourself in that hallway, don't be afraid. Don't try to run back to the crowded rooms you just left. Keep walking. Feel the cool air of the silence on your face. Listen to the echo of your own footsteps. Notice the subtle patterns on the walls. This hallway is a necessary part of the journey. It is where you shed the layers of who you thought you were so that you can become who you truly are. And remember, even when you feel most alone in that hallway, the teacher is always just a breath away, watching you with eyes of infinite kindness, waiting for you to realize that you have never been alone for a single second of your existence. The more you walk this path, the more you will notice that the world itself starts to look different. The trees seem greener, the sky seems wider, and the people you encounter seem more like brothers and sisters than strangers. This is because when you find peace with yourself, you naturally project that peace onto everything around you. You stop seeing the world as a place of competition and start seeing it as a place of cooperation. You realize that everyone is just doing their best to navigate their own hallways, and your only job is to be a kind presence as you pass each other. This kindness begins to flow outward like a gentle stream that has finally found its way past the jagged rocks of ego and the heavy silt of past regrets. When you are no longer at war with your own silence, you stop being a soldier in the world and start being a gardener. You realize that the people around you are not obstacles to your happiness or judges of your worth, but living beings who are also thirsting for the same stillness you have discovered. This realization dissolves the sharp edges of your interactions, replacing them with a soft, spacious understanding. You can sit with a friend who is grieving and not feel the need to fill the air with empty words, because you now know that silence is often the most profound form of companionship. You can stand in a busy line at the market and feel a surge of warmth for the strangers around you, recognizing that beneath the surface of their hurried lives, they are also seeking a home within themselves. There is a touching account from the ancient traditions about a monk who spent 40 years in a remote forest, living a life of radical simplicity. When he was finally old and nearing the end of his journey, a young traveler happened upon his dwelling and asked him what the most important lesson he had learned in all those decades of isolation was. The old monk looked at the traveler with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of the forest itself and replied that he had learned that there is no such thing as a stranger. He explained that when he first arrived, he felt alone because he saw the trees, the animals, and the stars as something separate from him. But as the years passed, the boundaries of his skin seemed to melt away. He began to feel the thirst of the earth during a drought as his own thirst, and the joy of the birds in the morning as his own joy. He realized that the concept of loneliness only exists when we think we are a small, isolated island. Once you realize you are part of the vast continent of existence, the very idea of being alone becomes an impossibility. This shift from being an island to being a part of the continent is the essence of spiritual maturity. It requires us to look at our fears of abandonment and rejection not as truths about our value, but as echoes of an old survival instinct that no longer serves us. In the wild, being alone meant being vulnerable to predators, but in the realm of the spirit, being alone is where we find our greatest strength. It is where we forge the steel of our resolve and the gold of our compassion. When you can stand tall in your own solitude, you become a pillar of support for others. You are like the central pole of a great tent, because you are firm and steady, others can find shelter and warmth around you. Consider the life of a great poet who spends days searching for a single right word. To the world, the poet looks inactive, perhaps even idle, sitting by a window and staring at nothing for hours. But inside, there is a fierce and beautiful struggle happening. The poet is diving deep into the ocean of the human experience, looking for the pearls of truth that can only be found in the depths. If the poet were constantly surrounded by chatter and activity, those pearls would remain hidden. The solitude is the oxygen that allows the poet to dive deep and stay there. Your life is a poem that is being written in real time. Each moment of quiet reflection is a search for the right word, the right action, or the right thought that will make your life a work of beauty and meaning. I recall a story of a young man who was very talented but also very restless. He felt that his life was a series of missed connections and that he was always on the outside looking in. He went to a wise grandmother in his village and asked her why he felt so empty despite his many friends. She took him to a nearby well and asked him to look inside. He said he saw his own face, but the water was moving and the image was distorted. She told him that the well was like his heart. Because he was always moving from one person to another, seeking validation, the water of his heart was never still enough to reflect his true nature. She told him to come back every day and sit by the well for 1 hour without speaking. At first, he found it unbearable. He felt the weight of his loneliness like a heavy stone on his chest. But slowly, the water became still. He began to see not just his face, but the sky, the clouds, and the overhanging trees reflected in the well. He realized that when he was still, he didn't just find himself, he found the whole world. This is the paradoxical gift of loneliness. It strips us of everything that is not essential until we are left with nothing but our own awareness. And in that awareness, we find that we are connected to everything that has ever lived or will ever live. It is like the space inside a cup. Without that empty space, the cup would be a useless block of clay. It is the emptiness that gives the cup its value, allowing it to hold water, wine, or tea. Your loneliness is that empty space within you. It is what allows you to hold the experiences of your life, the beauty of the world, and the love of others. If you were constantly full of noise and ego, there would be no room for anything else. In the teachings of the Masters, there is a beautiful metaphor about the moon reflected in 1,000 bowls of water. Although there are many reflections, there is only one moon. When you are alone and you look at your own heart, you are looking at one of those reflections. But the peace you find there is the same peace that everyone else finds in their own hearts. There is no such thing as your peace or my peace, there is only peace. When you touch that stillness, you are touching the common thread that binds all of humanity together. You realize that your struggles, your hopes, and even your loneliness are shared by every person on this planet. This realization is the birth of true empathy. You stop seeing people as others and start seeing them as different versions of yourself. There was a woman who lived in a small cottage on a cliff overlooking the sea. She was a weaver, and she spent her days working at her loom, watching the tides come in and go out. People in the nearby town felt sorry for her, thinking she must be desperately lonely with only the sound of the waves for company. But the woman felt she was the luckiest person in the world. She felt that the sea was her oldest friend, always changing yet always the same. She felt that the patterns she wove into her cloth were a conversation with the wind and the light. She had discovered that when you are fully engaged with your work and your environment, the need for human chatter disappears. She was not alone, she was in a constant state of communion with the rhythms of nature. You can find this same sense of communion in your own life, no matter where you live. You don't need a cottage on a cliff or a hut in the forest. You just need to bring your full attention to whatever you are doing. When you are washing the dishes, be with the water and the plates. When you are walking to your car, feel the air on your skin and the movement of your muscles. This quality of presence is the ultimate cure for the ache of isolation. It turns the mundane into the miraculous. You realize that the world is constantly talking to you, if only you would be quiet enough to hear it. Often, we feel lonely because we are waiting for someone else to initiate a connection. We wait for the phone to ring, for a message to arrive, or for someone to notice our pain. But the path to healing begins when we take the initiative to connect with ourselves. Instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers, plant your own garden. Instead of waiting for someone to tell you that you are worthy, recognize your own inherent value. This is not about becoming self-centered, it is about becoming self-sufficient. When you are no longer a beggar for attention, you become a king or queen of your own inner realm. You can then give to others from a place of strength rather than a place of lack. I remember a story of a great king who had everything he could ever want, yet he was deeply unhappy. He consulted all the wise men in his kingdom, and one of them told him that he would find happiness only when he wore the shirt of a truly happy man. The king's messengers searched the entire land and finally found a humble woodcutter who was singing as he worked, looking completely content. When they asked the woodcutter for his shirt to give to the king, the woodcutter laughed and said that he didn't even own a shirt. This story reminds us that happiness and peace are not about what we have or who we have around us. They are about the state of our own hearts. The woodcutter was happy because he was at peace with his life as it was, even in his poverty and solitude. When you sit in your own quiet space today, try to cultivate that same spirit of the woodcutter. Look around at your life and find something to be genuinely grateful for. It might be the warmth of the sun through the window, the taste of a piece of fruit, or simply the fact that you can breathe. Let that gratitude fill the empty spaces of your loneliness. Feel it expanding in your chest, pushing back the shadows of doubt and fear. You will find that as your gratitude grows, your loneliness shrinks. You realize that you have so much to offer the world, simply by being a person who is at peace. This peace is a form of silent service. You don't have to go out and preach or try to change people. By simply being a person who is comfortable in their own skin, you are providing a powerful example for everyone you meet. You are showing them that it is possible to be still in a world that is constantly moving. You are showing them that it is possible to be happy with little. And most importantly, you are showing them that they don't have to be afraid of themselves. Your life becomes a quiet invitation for others to join you in the space of understanding and compassion. Think of a candle in a dark room. It doesn't have to do anything to change the darkness, it just has to be a flame. The light naturally dispels the shadows. Your inner peace is that flame. When you are at home with your loneliness, you are a light in the dark. You make the world a little less frightening and a little more beautiful for everyone who crosses your path. This is the true power of solitude. It is the power to transform not just yourself, but the very atmosphere of the world around you. There was a young seeker who asked his teacher, "How long will it take for me to find the truth?" The teacher replied, "As long as you are looking for it elsewhere." The seeker was confused and asked, "But where else should I look?" The teacher pointed to the seeker's own heart and said, "The truth is not a destination you reach, it is the person who is doing the traveling. Your loneliness is the road that leads you back to that traveler. It is the path that strips away the distractions until you are forced to look at who you really are. Don't be afraid of the road. Don't try to find a shortcut. Just keep walking, one breath at a time, until you realize that you have already arrived." In the quiet moments of your evening, when the house is still and the world outside has faded away, take a moment to thank your loneliness. Thank it for being the mirror that showed you your own strength. Thank it for being the silence that allowed you to hear your own wisdom. And thank it for being the space where you finally learned to love yourself. You have turned a shadow into a friend, and in doing so, you have unlocked the door to a freedom that can never be taken away. You are no longer a prisoner of your circumstances, you are the master of your own soul. As you close your eyes and prepare for rest, feel the warmth of that inner home you have built. Know that it is always there for you, a sanctuary that no one else can enter and no one else can disturb. You are safe. You are whole. You are exactly where you need to be. And you are never, ever truly alone. This profound sense of belonging to yourself is the final bridge between the individual soul and the universal heart. When you reach this state of inner harmony, you realize that the walls you thought were keeping you in were actually the boundaries that defined your unique perspective on the world. You no longer see the space between you and another person as a gap of isolation, but as a field of potential where understanding and love can grow. You move with a quiet confidence that is not born of arrogance or social success, but from the simple, unshakable knowledge that you are a cherished part of the living cosmos. Your solitude has become a fertile ground, and every thought you think, every word you speak, is a seed that carries the fragrance of your inner peace. There is a story of an ancient master who was asked by a disciple how one could remain centered while living in a world of constant change and chaos. The master led the disciple to a small pond where a single lotus was blooming. He pointed to the leaves and explained that while the lotus lives in the water never stays on its leaves. It simply beads up and rolls off, leaving the surface dry and untouched. The master told the disciple that his heart should be like the lotus leaf. You can be in the world, you can experience its storms and its sunshine, but you do not have to let it soak into your core. Your solitude is the coating that protects your inner heart, allowing you to engage with life fully without losing yourself to its demands. When you have made friends with your loneliness, you have created that protective layer of wisdom that allows you to remain pristine even in the muddiest of waters. This is the secret of the masters throughout history. They did not escape the world, they simply learned how to carry their own silence with them into the noise. They could walk through a crowded marketplace and remain as still as a mountain peak. They could face criticism and praise with the same gentle smile, because they were no longer looking for their reflection in the eyes of others. They had found their true face in the mirror of their own solitude. You have this same capacity. Each time you choose to breathe through a moment of loneliness instead of running from it, you are strengthening your ability to remain calm and clear in any situation. You are becoming a person who is not easily swayed by the opinions of the world, because you have found a truth that is deeper than words. In the final stages of this journey, you find that even the desire to be understood by others begins to fade. You realize that to be truly known by yourself is the highest form of intimacy. This does not make you cold or distant, on the contrary, it makes you more capable of true warmth. Because you are not trying to get anything from others, you can give yourself to them completely. You can listen without judging, love without clinging, and help without expecting anything in return. You become a source of unconditional kindness, a light that shines simply because it is the nature of light to shine. You are like the sun, which provides warmth to the flowers and the weeds alike, asking for no recognition and no reward. I remember a story about a great teacher who was once asked if he ever felt the weight of his responsibilities or the burden of his followers. He laughed and said that he felt like a child playing on the seashore. He said that the ocean of truth was so vast and the sand beneath his feet was so warm that he had no room for the concept of a burden. He saw his work not as a duty, but as a joy, a way to share the shells and stones he had found with anyone who happened to be walking by. This is how life feels when you have transformed your loneliness into a peaceful solitude. You are no longer working to survive, you are playing in the vastness of your own existence. Every challenge becomes an interesting puzzle, and every person you meet becomes a fellow traveler on the beach. The ancient texts often describe the state of liberation as one of great joy and lightness. This joy is not the temporary excitement of winning a prize or receiving a compliment. It is the steady, quiet joy of being at home in your own skin. It is the joy of knowing that you are enough, that you have always been enough, and that you will always be enough. This realization is the ultimate freedom. It is the end of the long search for home, because you have realized that home is the very ground you are standing on. You are the architect, the inhabitant, and the sanctuary itself. When you look back on the path you have walked, you will see that every moment of loneliness was a necessary step. It was the friction that polished the diamond of your soul. It was the winter that prepared the soil for the spring. You can now look at your past with a sense of deep gratitude, even for the painful parts, because you see how they all led you to this moment of clarity. You are no longer a victim of your history, you are the master of your present. You have turned your deepest fear into your greatest ally, and in doing so, you have found a peace that the world can neither give nor take away. In your quiet moments from now on, remember that you are carrying a precious treasure within you. You are carrying the legacy of all those who have sought the truth and found it in the silence of their own hearts. You are a living testament to the power of the human spirit to find meaning in the midst of emptiness and light in the midst of darkness. Your life is a beautiful, unfolding mystery, and you are the one who gets to witness it from the front row. Don't be in a hurry to reach the end of the story. Enjoy the quiet chapters as much as the loud ones. Appreciate the pauses as much as the action. The stars above us have been shining for billions of years, each one separated by vast distances of space, yet they all work together to create the majesty of the night sky. You are like one of those stars. Your solitude is not a sign of separation, but a part of your brilliance. By being fully yourself, in your own unique space, you are contributing your light to the beauty of the whole. Never doubt your importance. Never doubt your connection. You are woven into the very fabric of existence, and the universe would be incomplete without your unique presence. As you move forward, let your heart be a sanctuary for everyone you meet. Let your silence be a comfort to those who are afraid of the dark. Let your laughter be a reminder that life is meant to be enjoyed. And let your presence be a steady light that guides others back to their own inner home. You have found the secret of making friends with your loneliness, and that secret is simply this: you were never alone to begin with. You were always held in the arms of the infinite, and you always will be. Take a deep breath and feel the stillness in the room. This is your sanctuary. This is your peace. This is your true self. Rest in this knowledge. Let it soak into every cell of your body and every corner of your mind. You are at peace. You are home. You are free. The journey has led you back to where you started, but you are seeing it for the first time with eyes of wisdom and a heart of love. Everything is as it should be. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. You are whole.